Hello, welcome to the France 24 interview. I'm Annette Young. For the last 4 years, Tony Blair's stomping ground has been the Middle East, where he's been the quartet's special envoy to the region. But with the peace process having reached an impasse, the former British Prime Minister's profile has been somewhat diminished, or has it? Tony Blair joins me here today at the British Embassy here in Paris. Tony Blair, thank you so much for being with us.
My pleasure.
In recent weeks, you've been urging the West to develop a regional strategy in terms of how to deal with the Arab uprising. But, you're saying that this is not the time to be spectators. This is, in fact, the time to be players. But isn't the case that Western powers could therefore be accused of being interventionist as such?
There's always a risk of that. But the biggest risk is that we don't act in circumstances where people need us to act. And by the way, this is not a question of the West imposing some plan on the region, but it is a question of us understanding that the region is undergoing this revolution. It will include political reform, but it also urgently needs to have economic and social reform with it. And in circumstances where we will definitely want to step up and provide assistance to people, then I think it makes sense for us to say, look, let's take a look at the region as a whole and see what we do to support the modernizing and democratic forces. And a major part of that, of course, is to relaunch the Israeli-Palestinian peace process in a way that's credible.
But given you were a supporter of the Iraq war, can you be a credible voice in saying or raising such proposals?
Yeah, look, Iraq today is a democracy. Now, whatever the imperfections, it is. And actually what's sweeping across the whole of the region is a desire for people to have the freedom to elect their governments. I think the single most important thing, and by the way, this applies to Iraq as well, is to realize that it's not just about the freedom to vote in and out your government. Democracy is not just a constitutional process whereby the majority rule. It's also about freedom of expression, a free media, freedom of religion, and open market. So I think what is important right at this moment is for us to realize whatever happens in the Arab world, in this region, is going to impact us profoundly. And we've got to be, as I say, players and not spectators.
So is it true to say that we've been seeing less of you? I mean, in terms of your profile.
Well, I'm not a Prime Minister anymore, but no, I'm from the region. I'm very, very active. And in fact, I worked out my last trip was my 66th trip to the Middle East in the 4 years since I stepped down from being Prime Minister. I'll go back again next week. And, people sometimes say to me, what on earth are you doing, busying yourself now with this roadblock or that problem between the Israelis and the Palestinians? My view is that this conflict remains at the heart of the whole region and its future. We've got to resolve it. There is no alternative but to resolve it, and you just got to keep working at it.
Now, you're in Paris at the moment. You've just met with the French Foreign Minister, Alain Juppé, talking about the French initiative to sort of kickstart these peace talks. What exactly is actually happening with that initiative as such?
Well, I think France is absolutely right to try and say to everyone, you can't leave a vacuum. And the French initiative was an attempt to fill that. Now, the Americans are obviously working very hard in advance of...
But they've been very cool towards this idea from President Sarkozy.
I think actually, having just come from Washington myself and talked to the people there, I don't think they're cool towards it, but what they obviously want to know is it's got some chance of success. And, in the end, the political negotiation will always be handled primarily by the Americans. But I think the French desire to have this negotiation renewed in a credible way is absolutely right. And I think it's been important in concentrating people's minds.
So what is happening with the suggestion of a donors conference this month being turned into some sort of peace talk fest?
I don't think that will happen this month now, but we're going to have a donors conference at some point.
Is it likely to happen in the short-term future? Are we talking with him?
I hope so. I can't be sure, to be honest, right now, but it is necessary also to realise that the support that has been given by Western countries, by Arab countries to the Palestinian Authority has been hugely important. The work that I do out in Jerusalem is really to do with supporting the Palestinian economy and building the institutions for a future Palestinian state. Now, if there's any good news, by the way, in the last few years, it's what the Palestinian Authority have been doing under the leadership of President Abbas and Prime Minister Fayyad and building that. those institutions. They've taken the militia off the street. The Palestinian economy has actually been growing strongly on the West Bank. Even in Gaza in the last 6 months, it's begun to move. And when you travel around the West Bank, as I do today, you see the signs of economic progress. But it's very dependent on us keeping the aid going along with the economic reform the Palestinians are making. So it's important we have, at some point, a renewal of those commitments by the donors.
But you've admitted that the Arab Spring, if anything, has probably made it less likely, possibly, to secure a peace deal between the Israelis and Palestinians, because the Israelis are so worried about the threat of security as such.
Actually, what I said was that it complicated it, which it does. But in one sense, it also offers an opportunity. I mean, truthfully, for Israel, there is a huge strategic interest now in securing peace with the Palestinians, because the region is changing.
But if anything, the Israelis are seen as the ones who have been somewhat more difficult in this process.
Well, they will be difficult on the question of security. And you've got to be in Israel and to, as I do a lot in their media, just to understand that Israel still feels itself in a position where it's surrounded by countries essentially hostile to it. They also realize that the points of predictability in the region, for example in Egypt, have now been replaced by points of unpredictability, frankly. So for Israel, there's a very clear interest. And for the Palestinians, statehood is an objective that is not just about some political campaign, it's existential for them. It makes a difference to their lives.
So, but is it difficult for people such as yourself when both parties seem to be unwilling to budge? And, it's left up to you as such.
Yeah, but, the thing I learned in Northern Ireland is you just keep going because there isn't an alternative. The alternative to peace is war. I mean, it always is in these situations. And by the way, one big difference with the Northern Ireland situation, which we worked on for, 10 years to finally get an agreement, the big difference is that in Northern Ireland, we never have and still don't have and never have had an agreement as to the final outcome. Here we do. It's 2 states for 2 peoples.
So what do you think of the Palestinians' move in terms of heading to the UN General Assembly in September and seeking recognition of a state?
Look, I understand the frustration, but as President Abbas himself has made clear, the preference is negotiation. I mean, it's got to be, because in the end, the question always, even if you secured such a declaration, is to get the state on the ground. It's the facts on the ground that make the difference. Now,
you talked earlier about the unpredictable nature of the region, and of course one country very close to Israel and Palestine is Syria. So talking about Syria, are you worried about what's going on there? Do you think that President Bashar al-Assad's days are in fact numbered?
I think it's very difficult to engage in such a repression of your people and retain legitimacy. So look, I think it's very difficult, again, to predict the outcome there. But the one thing that I've learned in this region in the last few months, and it's interesting that even at my stage in politics, you're still learning, is that if on rational analysis something is unsustainable, then the fact that it's being temporarily sustained does not mean it will carry on being sustained. You see what I mean? So I think that this situation in Syria can't hold. At some point, the pressure for change in the way the modern world works, with very open and transparent interaction between people, with the new social media, with everything that's happening in the region, I just think either there is a truly credible process of reform put in place, or there will be change.
And the other hotspot in the region, of course, is Libya. And do you think the NATO and its allies campaign are still working? I mean, are they achieving their objectives?
Well, it's working in the sense that if you hadn't intervened, you would have had large numbers of people killed. And I think it would have been unthinkable for us just to have stood by and done nothing.
But you've been accused as the then British Prime Minister of fostering a warm relationship, for the want of a better phrase, with Colonel Gaddafi. Is that something you now regret?
No, I think it's perfectly simple, this. I mean, when he does the right thing, giving up his nuclear and chemical weapons program, which he did following the Iraq War, and that was a huge thing for him to do. He renounced terrorism and started cooperating in the fight against it. We should welcome that. When he ends up brutalizing his own people, we should condemn it. I mean, I think it's a very simple situation. When he's doing the right thing, we should support it. When he's doing the wrong thing, we have to take action. So, what I think is the problem in the region as a whole is that all the leaders there have got to understand there is this process of change going on, because people, look, people live in a world today where they can see that they don't have to live in that way. And by the way, as important as anything else in this, I actually think not more important than political reform, but as important, is this sense by people that corruption, outdated systems of the economy and so on are keeping people back, that they're not able to enjoy the opportunities they can. And one of the things that I think is really important is for us in the West to encourage a process of steady evolution, because that actually is better than revolution. The problem with revolution is always not where it begins, but where it ends. And so I think if we're smart now, we, from the outside, people in the region, will start to plan out a gradual and steady movement of change that allows this change to happen with stability and order.
But the Middle East, as you know, can be a quagmire, and people with the best of intentions can get lost, can't they?
Sure, but on the other hand, you disengage, you also have problems. So, one of the things that I learned in government through Iraq, through Afghanistan actually, broader than the region, is that with these very profound religious, tribal influences, with this very difficult political situation in the region, either decision is tough. You stay out, you get one set of consequences. You enter in, you get another set. But I think in the end, what the Arab Spring does is offer us the possibility of real change, change that is consensual and beneficial and democratic. It's a moment of huge opportunity, but we need to be trying to shape it.
Tony Blair, I'm afraid that's all we have time for. That's it for this edition of the Frans van Kat interview. Stay tuned for more news and headlines, which are coming up shortly.